The crowd pressed against the barricades outside Buckingham Palace. Cameras flashed. Children waved small Union Jack flags. It was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of royal tradition and grace. But in less than 3 seconds, everything would change. The royal motorcade moved slowly through the gates. Princess Anne sat in the second vehicle, her face composed, her posture perfect. She had done this 1,000 times. The routine was simple, predictable, safe. But across the street, a black sedan sat idling. Its engine hummed too loudly. The windows were tinted dark, darker than any civilian car should be. And behind the wheel, a man watched. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel. His jaw was clenched. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Officer James Hartley stood at his post near the palace gates. He was a royal guard, trained to notice what others missed. The polished boots, the red uniform, the tall bearskin hat. To the tourists, he looked like a statue. But his eyes were always moving, always watching, and right now. His eyes locked onto that black sedan. Something was wrong. The car's position was too deliberate, the angle too perfect. The driver hadn't moved, hadn't looked away from the motorcade. James felt his pulse quicken. His training kicked in instantly. He had maybe 2 seconds to decide. Act or wait. Trust his instinct or ignore it. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The black sedan suddenly lurched forward. Tires screeched against the pavement. The crowd gasped. Some screamed. The car accelerated fast, too fast, heading straight toward Princess Anne's vehicle. The driver's face was twisted with rage, with desperation, with something dark and final. James didn't think. He moved. His legs carried him faster than they ever had. His hand reached for his radio, shouting commands even as he ran. Other guards turned, their faces pale with shock. The motorcade driver saw the danger too late. He tried to swerve, but the street was too narrow, the crowd too close. The black sedan closed the distance in seconds. 50 feet, 30 feet, 20. James reached the side of Princess Anne's car just as the sedan came within 10 feet. He slammed his hand against the hood of the royal vehicle, signaling the driver. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Reverse. Now, the driver obeyed instantly. The car lurched backward. Tires squealed. The black sedan shot past, missing the princess by mere inches. It clipped the front bumper with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact sent the royal car skidding sideways. Inside, Princess Anne gripped the door handle, her face pale but steady. The black sedan didn't stop. It careened forward, out of control now, heading straight for the crowd pressed against the barricades. Children screamed. Parents grabbed their kids. Panic exploded in every direction, and then everything seemed to move in slow motion. James saw the driver's face through the windshield. Wild eyes, a mouth open in a scream, and in his hand, something metallic. Something small and deadly. A gun. The realization hit James like ice water. This wasn't just a reckless driver. This wasn't an accident. This was an attack. And the man behind the wheel was a fugitive with nothing left to lose. The car screeched to a halt. The door flew open. The man stumbled out, weapon raised, his voice cracking as he shouted something incoherent. The crowd scattered in terror. But James stood firm. What happened next would be caught on dozens of cameras, shared millions of times, analyzed by experts, debated by the world. But in that moment, only one thing mattered. James looked into the eyes of a man who had already decided to die. The man's hand trembled as he pointed the gun toward the crowd. His face was gaunt, hollowed out by weeks on the run. His name was Marcus Webb, though few people would remember it. What they would remember was the desperation in his eyes, the wild, cornered look of someone who had lost everything. Marcus had been wanted by police for 3 months. Robbery, assault, threats against public figures. He had fallen through the cracks of society, his life unraveling thread by thread until nothing remained but rage and a reckless plan. He had decided that if his life was over, it would end in a way people would never forget, but he hadn't counted on Officer James Hartley. James stood 15 feet away, his body positioned between Marcus and the fleeing crowd. His hand hovered near his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. His training screamed at him to act, to neutralize the threat immediately. But something deeper, something human made him pause. "Put the gun down," James said. His voice was steady, almost gentle. "You don't want to do this." Marcus laughed. It was a broken sound, bitter and hollow. "You don't know what I want. You don't know anything about me?" "I know you're scared," James replied. "I know you feel trapped. But this doesn't have to end badly. Not for you. Not for anyone here." Behind them, other guards were moving into position. Armed officers crept closer, weapons drawn, fingers on triggers. The protocol was clear. A man with a gun near royalty. Neutralize the threat. Eliminate the danger. No hesitation. But James raised his free hand slightly, signaling them to hold. To wait. The crowd had scattered to a safer distance now, but dozens of people still watched from behind cars and buildings. Phones were out. Cameras recording. Every second of this confrontation would be replayed 1,000 times, analyzed, judged. James knew that whatever happened next would define him for the rest of his life. Marcus took a step forward. The gun wavered in his hand. "I just wanted them to see," he said, his voice cracking. "I wanted them to understand what it's like, to lose everything. To be invisible." "You're not invisible," James said. "I see you. Everyone here sees you." "They see a criminal," Marcus spat. "A monster. That's all I am to them now." James shook his head slowly. "That's not true. You're a person who's hurting, a person who made mistakes. But you're still a person, and it's not too late to choose something different." For a moment, something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Uncertainty. Hope. Maybe. His grip on the gun loosened slightly. But then he glanced toward Princess Anne's car, now safely reversed and surrounded by guards. His jaw tightened again. "They live in palaces," he said bitterly. "They have everything. And people like me, we have nothing. We don't matter." "You matter," James said firmly. "Your life matters. What you do in the next 30 seconds matters more than anything that's come before." The air was thick with tension. Every guard had their weapon trained on Marcus now. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, and it would all be over. James could feel the weight of their fingers on triggers, the readiness to fire, the certainty that this man was a threat that needed to be eliminated. But James didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on Marcus's. He kept his voice calm. "My name is James," he said. "I'm a father. I have a daughter who's 7 years old. Her name is Emma. Every morning before I come to work, she asks me to promise I'll come home safe. And every morning, I promise her I will." Marcus's eyes flickered. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand something," James continued. "I could draw my weapon right now. I could end this. But if I do that, my daughter has to grow up knowing her father took a life. And your family, whoever they are, they have to live with what you became in your final moment. That's not what I want. I don't think it's what you want either." Marcus's hand dropped slightly. The gun pointed toward the ground now, instead of the crowd. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving with emotion. "I don't have anyone," he whispered. "No family. No one who cares if I live or die." "That's not true," James said. "I care. Right now, in this moment, you are the most important person in my world. Because what happens to you matters. How this ends matters." Tears streamed down Marcus's face now. His grip on the gun weakened further. But his finger was still on the trigger. Still dangerous. Still capable of changing everything in an instant. And then, from somewhere behind the barricades, a child's voice rang out. "Mummy, why is that man crying?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. Marcus's head turned slightly toward the sound. His eyes found the child, a little girl with blonde curls, clutching her mother's hand. The girl looked at Marcus with pure curiosity, untainted by fear or judgment. Something broke inside Marcus's web in that moment. The gun slipped from Marcus's fingers. It clattered onto the pavement with a sound that echoed across the silent street. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Marcus collapsed to his knees, his hands covering his face as sobs racked his body. James moved forward carefully, deliberately. He kicked the gun away, sending it skittering across the concrete toward another officer. Then he knelt beside Marcus, placing a hand gently on the man's shoulder. "It's over," James said softly. "You made the right choice." Other guards rushed forward now, securing Marcus with handcuffs. But there was no violence in their movements, no anger. They had all witnessed something rare, something that didn't happen in training manuals or operational procedures. They had seen mercy work where force would have ended in tragedy. Princess Anne emerged from her vehicle. Her security team tried to keep her back, but she waved them away with quiet authority. She walked toward James with steady, measured steps. Her face was pale but composed. When she reached him, she extended her hand. "Officer Hartley," she said, "your quick thinking saved lives today, including mine." James stood and shook her hand, his face flushing slightly. "Just doing my duty, Your Highness." "No," Princess Anne said firmly. "You did far more than duty. You showed courage of a different kind. The kind that chooses compassion over force. That's rare. That's valuable." Marcus was being led away now, his head bowed, his body still shaking with sobs. But he was alive. Everyone was alive. And somehow, despite the chaos and danger, the day had ended without bloodshed. The crowd slowly began to return, murmuring in hushed, awed tones. Cameras had captured everything. Within hours, the footage would circle the globe. The headlines would scream about the attack, the gun, the dramatic confrontation. But they would also tell another story. A story about a guard who chose words over weapons. About a man who found mercy at the edge of despair. James returned to his post, his legs still trembling slightly from adrenaline. His commanding officer approached, a stern-faced man named Captain Richardson. James expected a reprimand. He had broken protocol. He had taken a massive risk. The situation could have ended in disaster, but Richardson simply nodded. "Well done, Hartley. Well done." Later that evening, James sat in the guards' quarters, replaying the day in his mind. His hands still shook slightly when he thought about how close everything had come to tragedy. How easily it could have gone wrong. One different choice. One moment of panic, one trigger pulled, his phone buzzed. A message from his wife. "Emma wants to know if you're coming home tonight. She's worried." James smiled and typed back quickly. "Coming home safe, just like I promised." But he knew the truth. The promise he made to Emma every morning was never guaranteed. His job was dangerous, unpredictable. Every day brought new risks, new threats, new moments where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. And yet, because today he had proven something important. That duty wasn't just about following orders. It was about choosing the hardest path when it mattered most, about seeing humanity even in the most desperate moments. 3 days later, James received a summons to Windsor Castle. He arrived in his dress uniform, uncertain what to expect. He was led through ornate corridors, past portraits of kings and queens, into a private sitting room. Princess Anne was there. Along with someone James hadn't expected to see, Camilla, the queen consort, stood by the window. She turned as James entered, her expression warm but serious. Beside her was a young woman James didn't recognize. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair and cautious eyes. "Officer Hartley," Camilla said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming, Your Majesty," James replied, bowing slightly. Camilla gestured to the young woman. "This is Charlotte. She's my goddaughter. She was in the crowd that day, very close to where Marcus Webb stopped his car." Charlotte stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. I was standing right there with my little sister. If you hadn't acted when you did, if the car had continued forward." Her voice trailed off, thick with emotion. James felt his throat tighten. He hadn't known, hadn't realized how many lives had been hanging in the balance of those few seconds. "I'm just grateful everyone was safe," he managed to say. Camilla studied him thoughtfully. "Princess Anne told me what you did. Not just the physical act of stopping the car, but what came after. How you talked to that man. How you chose compassion." "I did what felt right," James said simply. "That's precisely why we wanted to speak with you," Camilla replied. "Because doing what's right isn't always the same as doing what's expected. And I want to tell you something. A story that very few people know." James listened, confused but attentive. Camilla's expression grew distant, as if looking into the past. "Many years ago, before I was part of this family, I witnessed something similar. A moment of crisis where someone chose mercy over force. It changed my perspective on duty, on service, on what it truly means to protect others." She paused, her eyes meeting James's directly. "What you don't know is that Marcus Webb's story didn't begin the day he showed up outside Buckingham Palace." Camilla walked to a small desk and retrieved a folder. She handed it to James. Inside were documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. James scanned them quickly, his confusion deepening with each page. Marcus Webb, Camilla began, grew up in care, foster homes, institutions. He aged out of the system at 18 with nothing. No family, no support, no guidance. For a while he tried. He worked odd jobs. He stayed out of trouble. She paused, her expression pained. But 3 years ago his life fell apart. He lost his job, couldn't pay rent, ended up on the streets. And like so many others in his position, he became invisible, just another face in the crowd that society had forgotten. James looked up from the folder. "I don't understand. How do you know all this?" Charlotte spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "Because I knew him. Before everything went wrong." James's eyes widened. "You knew Marcus Webb?" Charlotte nodded slowly. "We volunteered at the same community center 5 years ago. Marcus helped with the youth program. He was kind, patient, good with kids. He talked about wanting to make a difference, to help children who'd grown up like he had." "What happened?" James asked. "Life happened," Charlotte said sadly. "The center lost its funding. Marcus lost his anchor. Without that purpose, without that community, he drifted. I tried to stay in touch, but he stopped answering calls, stopped showing up. By the time I realized how bad things had gotten, he'd already disappeared into the system. Arrests, warrants, a man running from everything." Camilla picked up the story. "When Princess Anne told me what happened, she mentioned your conversation with Marcus. How you talked about your daughter. About being a father. About having someone to come home to." She opened the folder to a specific photograph. It showed a younger Marcus, smiling, surrounded by children at the community center. He looked healthy, happy, full of life. "Marcus told the police something after his arrest," Camilla continued. "He said that when you talked to him about your daughter, he remembered why he'd wanted to work with children in the first place. He remembered that once, a long time ago, someone had believed he could be more than his circumstances. And in that moment he realized he still could be." James felt his chest tighten with emotion. He hadn't known any of this. Hadn't known that the desperate man with the gun had once been someone who cared for others, who wanted to help, who had simply fallen through the cracks of a system that couldn't catch everyone. "Why are you telling me this?" James asked quietly. Princess Anne, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "Because we want you to understand the full picture. Marcus Webb isn't a monster. He's a person who lost his way. And you, Officer Hartley, gave him a chance to find it again." Camilla nodded in agreement. "Marcus has agreed to a psychiatric evaluation. He's getting help now. Real help, counseling, support, a path forward. He'll face consequences for his actions, yes. But he'll also get the chance to heal, to rebuild, to become the person he once hoped to be. And it's because you didn't shoot him, Charlotte added, tears shining in her eyes. Because you saw a human being instead of just a threat. James sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was hearing. He had made a choice in a split second, guided by instinct and training and something deeper. He hadn't thought about the long-term consequences, hadn't considered the ripple effects. He had simply acted on what felt right. There's something else, Camilla said, her tone shifting slightly. Something I need to tell you about that day. Something that didn't make the news reports. James looked up, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Camilla exchanged a glance with Princess Anne, as if silently asking permission. Anne nodded almost imperceptibly. Before Marcus Webb drove toward the motorcade, Camilla began slowly. There was another incident. Something that happened inside the palace gates. Something involving me. James leaned forward, his full attention now focused on the Queen Consort. I was returning from a private visit to the hospital wing, Camilla explained. We have a small medical facility inside the palace grounds for staff and family. I had gone to visit someone important to me. She paused, choosing her words carefully. As I was leaving, I encountered a staff member who was having a breakdown. She was young, perhaps 23, and she'd just received terrible news. Her mother had passed away unexpectedly. She was alone in a corridor, crying, completely overwhelmed. Camilla's voice softened. I stopped to comfort her. I sat with her, talked. I held her hand while she grieved. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't scheduled. It was simply human kindness. But here's what you need to understand, Princess Anne interjected. While Camilla was with that staff member, she was supposed to be preparing for the public appearance. The motorcade. The schedule was tight. Security was coordinating movements down to the minute. Camilla nodded. I was late. 20 minutes late. Which meant the motorcade was delayed. Which meant that when Marcus Webb positioned his car when he made his move, the timing was different than he'd planned. The realization hit James like a physical blow. If you had been on time, he said slowly. If the schedule had gone as planned, Marcus would have hit a different vehicle, Princess Anne confirmed. One carrying several members of staff. Young people. People with families. The impact would have been catastrophic. The room fell silent as the full weight of the truth settled over them. So you see, Camilla said quietly, we're all connected in ways we don't always understand. My choice to stop and comfort a grieving staff member altered the timeline. Your choice to talk instead of shoot saved a life. Charlotte's choice to reconnect with Marcus after his arrest gave him hope. Every decision, every moment of compassion, creates ripples we can't always see. James felt tears prick his eyes. He had spent 3 days replaying that confrontation, questioning every choice, wondering if he'd put others at risk by not acting more aggressively. But now he understood. There was no perfect choice, no guaranteed outcome. Only human beings doing their best in impossible circumstances. What happens to Marcus now? James asked. Charlotte answered. He'll serve time, but with psychiatric support. And when he's ready, when he's healed, there's a program waiting. A second chance. 6 months passed. The media frenzy around the incident faded into memory, replaced by new headlines, new crises, new stories. But for those who had been there, who had lived through those terrifying moments, nothing would ever be quite the same. James continued his work as a royal guard. His daily routine remained unchanged on the surface. The same uniform, the same post, the same careful vigilance. But something fundamental had shifted inside him. He looked at crowds differently now, saw the individuals instead of the mass, understood that behind every face was a story, a struggle. A human being trying to navigate an impossible world. His daughter Emma had grown bolder in those months. She asked him questions now about his work, about what it meant to protect people, about what happened when someone made bad choices. James answered honestly, carefully, teaching her that justice and compassion weren't opposites. That sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose mercy. On a cold November morning, James received an unexpected letter. It was handwritten on simple paper, the writing shaky but legible. He opened it during his break, sitting alone in the guards' quarters. "Dear Officer Hartley," it began. "My name is Marcus Webb. You probably remember me, though I hope not for the reasons I deserve. I've wanted to write this letter for months, but I didn't know what to say. How do you thank someone for seeing you as human when you'd stop seeing yourself that way?" James continued reading, his throat tight. "I'm writing from a secure facility where I'm receiving treatment. Real treatment. For the first time in my life, someone is asking me about the pain instead of just the behavior. About the wounds instead of just the scars. It's hard. Facing yourself honestly is the hardest thing I've ever done. But it's also hope. Real hope. And I didn't think I'd ever feel that again." The letter went on to describe Marcus's progress. The therapy sessions. The medication that helped quiet the chaos in his mind. The slowly rebuilding sense of self-worth. And then, toward the end, something that made James's eyes blur with tears. "You told me that day that I mattered. That what I did in the next 30 seconds mattered more than everything that came before. I've thought about those words every single day since. Because you were right. I did matter. My choice mattered. And because of your choice, because you gave me those 30 seconds, I'm still here. I'm still trying. I'm still becoming." James folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. He would keep it. Read it on the hard days. The days when the job felt heavy. When the weight of responsibility felt crushing. It would remind him why he'd chosen this path. Why every moment, every decision, every interaction mattered. That evening, James was invited to a private ceremony at Windsor Castle. He arrived to find a small gathering. Princess Anne was there, along with Camilla. Charlotte stood beside them, smiling warmly. And there were others. The young staff member Camilla had comforted that day. The mother and daughter from the crowd. Several other guards who had been present during the incident. Camilla stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. "Officer Hartley, we've gathered today not for publicity or formal recognition, but for something more personal, more meaningful." She opened the box to reveal a medal. It wasn't one of the official royal honors, nothing that would appear in news reports or official records. It was simpler than that. More intimate. "This is the Medal of Compassionate Service," Camilla explained. "It's awarded rarely quietly to those who embody the best of what service means. Not just duty or protocol, but genuine human kindness in moments of crisis." Princess Anne took the medal from the box. "You could have taken the shot that day. No one would have questioned it. It would have been justified, legal, perhaps even expected. But you chose differently. You chose to see a person, not just a threat. And in doing so, you reminded all of us what true courage looks like." She pinned the medal to James's uniform. It was small, understated, a simple silver disc with an inscription, "Mercy in Action." The room erupted in quiet applause. Not the thunderous applause of public ceremonies, but the warm, genuine appreciation of people who understood the weight of what had happened. Who knew that James had risked everything on a belief that everyone deserves a chance at redemption. After the ceremony, Charlotte approached James. "I have something for you," she said, handing him a photograph. It showed Marcus at the community center years ago, surrounded by smiling children. But there was another photo paper-clipped to it. A recent one, taken at the facility where Marcus was receiving treatment. He was thinner, older looking, but his eyes were clear, and he was smiling. Not the wild, desperate expression from that terrible day, but a genuine, tentative smile. The smile of someone learning to hope again. "He wanted you to have this," Charlotte said softly. "He wanted you to know that the person in the first photo is still in there. Still fighting to come back?" James held the photographs, his vision blurring. "Will he make it?" he asked quietly. "Will he really be okay?" Charlotte considered the question carefully. "I don't know if any of us are ever truly okay," she said honestly. "But I know he has a chance now. A real chance. And that's more than he had 6 months ago." As James drove home that night, the medal secured carefully in his jacket pocket, he thought about chains of events. About how Camilla's kindness to a grieving staff member had altered a timeline. How his choice to talk instead of shoot had saved a life. How Charlotte's decision to reconnect with an old friend had given that life meaning again. None of them had known what their choices would lead to. None of them could have predicted the ripples spreading outward from moments of compassion. But together, without planning or coordination, they had created something beautiful from something terrible. When James arrived home, Emma was waiting by the door. She had stayed up past her bedtime, refusing to sleep until her father came home. He scooped her into his arms, holding her tight. "Did you keep your promise, Daddy?" she asked sleepily. "Did you come home safe?" "I did," James whispered into her hair. "I kept my promise." But he knew the deeper truth. He had come home not just safe, but changed. Better. More aware of the weight his choices carried and the power of seeing humanity. Even in the darkest moments, and somewhere, in a facility designed to heal broken people, Marcus Webb was learning the same lesson. 2 years later, James stood in the same spot outside Buckingham Palace, where everything had changed. The tourists pressed against the barricades, cameras flashing, children waving flags. It could have been any day, any moment. But for James, this place would always carry the weight of what had happened here. His radio crackled. "Hartley, you have a visitor at the East Gate." James frowned. Visitors during his shift were unusual. He made his way to the checkpoint, where a security officer waited with a man James almost didn't recognize. Marcus Webb stood there. Thinner than James remembered, his hair cut short, his clothes neat and clean. But it was his eyes that were most different. They were clear now, steady. The wild desperation had been replaced by something quieter. Something like peace. "Officer Hartley," Marcus said, his voice uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I came. I wanted to see you. To thank you properly." James felt his throat tighten. He had wondered about Marcus often over the past 2 years. Had read the updates Charlotte sent occasionally, but seeing him here, alive and seemingly whole, was different than reading words on a page. "Marcus," James said warmly, "of course it's okay. How are you?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I'm good. Really good. I completed the treatment program 6 months ago. I've been working since then. Nothing fancy, just a warehouse inventory, but it's honest work. It's stable. It's mine." They walked together along the palace grounds, away from the crowds. Marcus seemed nervous, his hands clasped tightly together, as if he were afraid he might fall apart if he'd let go. "I think about that day all the time," Marcus said quietly, "about how close I came to destroying everything. Not just my life, but other people's lives. Innocent people. That little girl who asked why I was crying." His voice cracked. "She saved me too, you know? Her innocence. Her curiosity. It reminded me that the world still had good in it." "You saved yourself," James said firmly. "I just gave you the space to make that choice." Marcus shook his head. "You gave me more than that. You gave me dignity when I deserved nothing. You saw a person when everyone else saw a monster. That's not something I'll ever forget." They stopped near a bench and Marcus pulled out his phone. He showed James a photograph. It was Marcus surrounded by teenagers at a youth center, all of them smiling, engaged in some kind of project. "I went back to volunteering," Marcus explained, "with a trisque youth. Kids who are aging out of the foster system like I did. I tell them my story. The whole story. The good parts and the terrible parts. And I tell them that one bad decision, one moment of desperation doesn't have to define your entire life." James felt pride swell in his chest. "That's incredible, Marcus. Really incredible." "Charlotte helped set it up," Marcus continued. "She never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. And Camilla, the queen consort, she's been supporting the program financially, quietly, without publicity. She believes in second chances." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I need you to understand something, Officer Hartley. I'm not grateful that I did what I did. I'm not proud of that moment. I caused terror. I put people in danger. I traumatized children. That's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. But I am grateful that you gave me the chance to become something more than that moment, to prove that people can change, that redemption is possible, that mercy isn't weakness. James sat down on the bench and Marcus joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching tourists photograph the palace, unaware of the profound moment unfolding just feet away. "I have a question," Marcus said finally. "Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything to talk to me instead of just ending it?" James considered the question carefully. He had asked himself the same thing countless times. "Because I saw my daughter in that crowd," he said slowly, "and I thought about what I would want someone to do if she ever found herself in a desperate moment. I would want someone to see her. To really see her, not just the mistake or the crisis, but the human being underneath." He turned to face Marcus directly. "And because I believe that most people, when given the choice between destruction and hope, will choose hope. You just needed someone to believe in that choice long enough for you to believe in it too." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for believing." As Marcus prepared to leave, he pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote something," he said, handing it to James. "For your daughter. For when she's old enough to understand what happened that day." James unfolded the paper. It was a letter written in Marcus's now steady handwriting. Addressed to Emma, it spoke about choices and consequences, about the power of compassion, about how one person's belief in you could change the entire trajectory of your life. "Tell her," Marcus said, "that her father is a hero. Not because he carried a weapon or wore a uniform, but because he chose to see humanity when it would have been easier to look away." After Marcus left, James remained on the bench for a long time. He thought about the chain of events that had brought them all here, about Camilla's kindness to a grieving staff member, about Charlotte's refusal to give up on an old friend, about Princess Anne's grace under pressure, about a little girl's innocent question, and about his own split-second decision to talk instead of shoot, to choose mercy over force. He thought about the dozens of people whose lives had been touched by that moment, the children in the crowd who had witnessed compassion instead of violence, the staff members in the motorcade who had been spared because of a delayed timeline, the teenagers Marcus now mentored, learning that mistakes didn't have to be final. That evening, he sat with Emma, now 9 years old, and told her an appropriate version of the story. He told her about the man who was hurting, about the choice to help instead of harm, about how people could change if given the chance. "Daddy," Emma asked, her eyes wide with understanding, "would you do it again, even though it was scary?" James pulled her close. "Every single time," he said without hesitation. "Because every person deserves the chance you gave Marcus, the chance to be more than their worst moment." Emma hugged him tight. "I'm proud of you, Daddy." Those 4 words spoken in the innocent voice of his daughter meant more than any medal or recognition ever could. Years would pass. Marcus would continue his work with at-risk youth, touching hundreds of lives with his story of redemption. James would retire from the Royal Guard eventually, but he would never forget the lesson of that day. Camilla would continue her quiet acts of kindness, understanding that every moment of compassion created ripples that spread farther than anyone could measure, and somewhere, in photo albums and memory books, images would remain. A royal guard standing firm in the face of danger, a desperate man making the choice to surrender instead of destroy, a little girl asking an innocent question, a community coming together to prove that second chances weren't just possible, they were essential. Because in the end, that was the real story. Not about royalty or protocol or dramatic confrontations, but about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, about seeing humanity in impossible circumstances, about believing that mercy was not weakness, but the highest form of courage, and about the profound truth that in any moment, with any choice, any person could change, not just their own life, but the lives of everyone around them. The story of that day outside Buckingham Palace would be told for years to come. But the real legacy wasn't in the headlines or the footage or the awards. It was in the lives changed, the hope restored, the belief that even in our darkest moments, someone might choose to see us, really see us, and offer us the one thing we all desperately need: a chance to begin again.